Hello and welcome to Cineworld's YouTube channel. I'm Laurie Blake and I'm joined by Luke Owen, and every week we're going to be discussing the latest cinematic releases, which films we think will be worth seeing in the cinema, and also all of the news from around Hollywood. But first, let's talk about what's coming up on the show. Coming up, Luke and I discuss the films that Cineworld is welcoming us back to the cinema with, from classics like Back to the Future and The Empire Strikes Back, as well as Jurassic Park in 4DX, which will really bring that dinosaur theme park to life, to modern masterpieces like Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, the lung-bursting glory of The Greatest Showman, or Black Panther, which you can see on Screen X. So Wakanda seems like it really does go on forever. Then there's brand new films for 2020 that we can finally all go and enjoy on the big screen, like one-shot war epic 1917 from Sam Mendes, legal thriller Dark Waters about a chemical company poisoning the residents of a small town, Vin Diesel kicking off an entire comic book universe in Bloodshot, and the latest idea from Pixar's bag of plenty, Onward, which is basically Dungeons and Dragons and dads. We'll be talking about all of that, plus taking a look at the opening moments of the long-lost New Mutants movie and discussing what we think it might mean for mutants in the MCU. So, Luke, it's a bit of an unprecedented time in cinema history, where cinemas have been closed for quite a long time. And Cineworld, hooray, is opening again today.
Hey.
It is opening on Friday, and they're showing a whole suite of older films, some films that are kind of a little bit more recent, some films that didn't have the full run in the cinema before everyone went into lockdown. So there's actually quite a lot on this list, and there's a lot, like, if you're a cinema fan, there is a lot to go and see, whether you like modern films, older films, some of the kind of classic films that they're getting a new lease of life at Cineworld, in fact, because they're being shown in 4DX or on Screen X. So these are kind of like almost like reimaginings of classic titles. Yeah. So let's run through a bit of the list of like what's coming out in the cinema. So you've got Back to the Future, the 35th anniversary edition. You've got Jurassic Park in 4DX, Black Panther on Screen X, Bohemian Rhapsody on Screen X, so you can imagine that you're at Live Aid, I imagine. You've got the entire Dark Knight trilogy. You've got Jumanji: The Next Level, which is also being shown in Screen X and select cinemas. You've got Onward, which came out just before everyone went into lockdown, Pixar's newest title. Empire Strikes Back, The Greatest Showman, 1917, Interstellar. These are all Christopher Nolan films. Harry Potter's entire run. You've also got Dark Waters, Proxima, Unhinged, and the new Vin Diesel vehicle, Bloodshot. Of these films, Luke, there's a really good selection here. Which one is your like top pick to see in the cinema, do you think?
Sonic the Hedgehog, mate.
Oh, of course, Sonic. I missed Sonic the Hedgehog off the list, and I knew you'd be like, yes, Sonic the Hedgehog is here. I know.
Probably the greatest film of 2020. I can't believe you missed it off this list.
There's been a lack of films in 2020, Luke, so far.
But in all seriousness, like Back to the Future, man. Like it's one of my all-time favorite movies, and like it's in my sort of top 3 films of all time. 2 of my top 3 are back on screens, because we got Back to the Future and we got Jurassic Park in 4DX. I love those 2 films. Like Back to the Future is a perfect movie, and I've seen Jurassic Park quite a few times, like at the cinema. Like, I saw it in the cinema back in '93. I've seen it when it's had re-releases, in cinemas around the country, but I've never seen it in something like 4DX.
Oh,
and like,
yeah,
that feels like that's the next new brilliant way to watch the film, right?
Yeah, so I went to see The Matrix in 4DX last year when Cineworld was showing it, and that was pretty epic. Like there was a lot of effects going on and stuff, and obviously like there's a lot of kung fu in that film, and there's a lot of trembling and the chair shaking, and it kind of feels like you're being beat up to a certain degree when you're watching Neo get pummeled. But I think for Jurassic Park it might be even better, because that's sort of like, I can picture it now, the sort of rumbling footsteps as the water's shaking on the dashboard of the car, and I can feel the chair going. And then when the T-Rex nudges the Jeep around when it's upside down and it spins, I can feel the chair moving. I think there's a lot of like enjoyable stuff to see in this. And I think even just being able to see Jurassic Park on the big screen again, because I saw it when it came out. And that is the last time that I saw it on the big screen. So what a treat to be like, you can actually go and see Jurassic Park, which is my favorite film of all time, on the big screen. And like, I think what's so brilliant about it is that it completely holds up as well. Like all the effects were such a clever mix of practical and digital that you know everything in Jurassic Park still looks just as good as it did in 1993. There's none of that sort of like the disconnect between when I was a kid. I thought everything kind of computer animated was like wowzers. You know, like looking back at the PlayStation 1 games and being like, I thought they were real people. And now you're like, that is a series of squares tied together in what is pretending to be clothes. You know, this is that this is a chance to see something that still looks pretty damn realistic nowadays, with the added benefit of getting that kind of extra sensory experience going on with it that sells you even more on the realism of that film. I'm very excited for that. I think that's going to be fantastic. Another thing I think I'm quite keen on seeing in the cinema, because I've watched it on Disney Plus, is Onward. I think Onward is a film that really, really deserves to be seen in the cinema. It is so poignant and like plays really heavily into my interests with like the sort of Dungeons and Dragons fantasy vibe of the whole thing. Chris Pratt and Tom Holland are incredible in that film. I think their kind of partnership throughout the whole thing is just brilliant. And yeah, it really, really got me towards the end. There is a like a emotional core to this film that is so touching and heartwarming, and like it's that perfect Pixar magic of like
Yeah.
filmmaking where they just ride that line between this is a really silly whimsical adventure, but it has a very heartfelt message channeling all of that energy forward. Really amazing stuff. What else on the list, Luke, do you think is worth seeing?
Well, you mentioned how like you're excited to see Onward because it deserves to be seen on a big cinema screen, and like I think that none of has that ever been more evident than Christopher Nolan movies. Like
Mhm.
Nolan makes movies for the big screen. Like yeah, you can watch them in home entertainment, but they are designed to be seen in that big screen format. Things like Interstellar, the Dark Knight trilogy, they are films that have been made specifically for the cinema experience. So, like, I haven't seen the Dark Knight trilogy in cinema since it came out. So I'm actually quite excited to go back and revisit that trilogy of films again, not on DVD this time or Blu-ray, but actually on the big screen where it's kind of supposed to be. I'm actually really excited to revisit those movies.
Yeah, I think what you don't realize about kind of one of the really subtle things I think about the Dark Knight trilogy specifically is just how unsettling the music is, and you
Mm,
don't quite get that experience watching it at home. That that sort of wailing siren sound effect that he likes to use for the scenes with the Joker and when things are going wrong in Gotham City, like that only really comes through on the audio in a cinema where it's that kind of like low rumble that surrounds you, and you'll really get sucked into, not just the sort of grand narrative that he's telling, but this kind of like sweeping cinematic experience of seeing these really huge spaces and this really impressive gargantuan city brought to its knees by someone like the Joker. I think it those films are ones that I definitely would love to see in the cinema, because I have such fond memories of like getting really hyped about going to see them when they first came out. And yeah, I think going to see them at Cineworld would be incredible. And also, like, it's a very good run up to Tenet coming to the cinema. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
and that there's a bit of a Christopher Nolan season. It's worth kind of investing in his back catalogue, because he's such a sort of he's one of those filmmakers that I think rides very high in people's like list of cinematic auteurs, and he's got that kind of streak through his films, and you can tell a Christopher Nolan film straight
Yeah.
off the bat.
There is a difference between having a bwom at home and having the bwom in a
Oh yeah.
cinema.
I want the big bombs, mate. Give me them bombs. There's all these. There's obviously you could also go see a Star Wars if you want to, which is another thing that like coming back to the cinema. They're also showing off all the Harry Potter films, so that like there's a lot of sort of films for the geekier side of the cinema goers, and I think that the choices that have been made of what to show on screen here are very smartly done. I think these are really, really epic films, and there's a lot of like, you can go see a whole franchise in the Harry Potter ones if you want to. You can go see the select best bits of other certain franchises, like we wouldn't show Jurassic Park: The Lost World, because why would you? Why would you? Remember the gymnastics bit? You wouldn't show that. They might show that. I don't know. But like, I think the Jurassic Park, that choice is brilliant. Back to the Future is brilliant, and it's weird because it's this. Obviously, there's an unprecedented time. Cinema isn't really. The films aren't coming out at the rate that they were before because everyone's a bit uncertain of what's happening kind of in the production line of things. However, the brilliance of cinema is that there are still all these other films that are worth going to see. There is so much history in cinema. There are so many good films that just being able to put those back into a huge, in front of a huge audience that Cineworld can kind of have there, and these huge spaces and these amazing sort of new technology like ScreenX that really sucks you into a movie and gives you this kind of whole peripheral vision experience as well. We're getting to see things in a way that, one, they were intended to be seen in the first place, and then in an advanced way that they never really were intended to be seen, but might add to the viewing experience as well. I think that's really, really interesting.
Oh, completely. Yeah. I think since lockdown and since the cinemas have been shut down, I follow a lot of my film friends on Twitter, and we've all been sort of saying like, man, I can't really wait for cinemas to reopen because we've all just missed being in the cinema and being in a cinema together. And I think what's great about this is that it's not just being into the cinema again, it's going to revisit those films that we love on the big screen in the cinema experience. It's films from our childhood. It's films from like our sort of teenage years. It's from our adult years. It's almost like geared towards people like you and I that are in our 30s. But but like even for people who've maybe not had a chance to see these films on the big screen. I remember once I was working with someone who once told me they were jealous of anyone who got to see Jurassic Park on the big screen. My first reaction was like, God, you're young. But then the second take of that is like, well, now you can. Now you can go in and see that on the big screen. So yeah, I'm dead excited to get back into the cinemas and go see some of my favorite films the way they were meant to be seen, and in some cases in whole new ways.
I think it's also worth mentioning here that if you are someone who hasn't, who's sort of seen Back to the Future to death and is a bit over the idea of seeing that, maybe you've gone and seen it in other screenings elsewhere, like, there's still a bunch of movies that are being shown that didn't really get the full run before we went into lockdown. And that's things like Onward, and that's Dark Waters, the legal thriller that stars Mark Ruffalo and is all about the DuPont chemical scandal. This has got very good reviews across the board. This is like about a corporate lawyer who turns all of his knowledge of corporations against the corporations to take them down for poisoning, basically poisoning an entire town. There's a brilliant New York Times article about the whole thing that the film is based on. You've also got Proxima, which stars Eva Green and Matt Dillon, and that's all about a mother training for a year-long mission to the International Space Station, but also trying to get over the deal of separation from her young 8-year-old daughter. This has also been reviewed incredibly well and looks like a really sort of gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching drama. You've got Unhinged with Russell Crowe looking all chubby and sweaty as this sort of road rage maniac who he gets beeped too much, Luke, and then he's like, oh, you beeped me and I'm going to make your life a misery. And as silly as that sounds, it actually looks pretty kind of galling and horrifying because like Russell Crowe has a proper body transformation in this film. He looks really he's got an unsettling vibe in this. And it's Karen Pistorius playing opposite him as the woman he's sort of harassing for tooting her horn too much. And then you've got Bloodshot, which is Vin Diesel's sort of starring role in the beginning of what is said to be the Valiant Comics expanded cinematic universe. Valiant Comics have characters like Turok and Ninjak and Exo Man of War and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit niche, but if you haven't heard of Bloodshot, he's a soldier who was killed and brought back to life, and he's got all like nano machines inside him that can knit him back together and make him stronger and faster and all that stuff. It's got sort of Wolverine vibes in that it's all about memory, but it's a little bit more science fiction-y and a bit more high tech than that, and looks pretty decent. It's one of those things where it's like we're starting a franchise by just announcing the franchise, but I quite like Vin Diesel films. So,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd definitely enjoy this one.
There is something comforting about a Vin Diesel action movie. And I find him to be a very comforting screen presence. Yeah, I mean, Bloodshot is a film that I did get to see before the cinema shutdown, and there is a lot of fun to be found within that. Like, it is very silly and it's very Vin Diesel, but it's kind of enjoyable in that way. I kind of dug it.
I think, and we've discussed this a few times recently, you and I, Luke, that we were literally talking yesterday about like what is going to be the next big cinematic franchise, and we were saying like maybe it's not a really big one, maybe it's one of these ones that's like a slightly lower budget film that has the scope to become a franchise, but flies slightly under the radar of you know all the weight of expectation being put on it, like the DC cinematic universe or like the MonsterVerse from Universal and all that kind of stuff. Like, all of these things were just crushed under the kind of expectation of like these first films have to do amazingly well in the cinema to get a series off the ground. And here's Bloodshot from kind of an offshoot comics brand that people might not necessarily have heard of. These are characters that are a little bit stranger, but then they could open themselves up to slightly more interesting takes on kind of superhero films. I think there's a lot in this, and it's probably worth seeing, just especially in case it does become the next big superhero franchise. You want to be in on the ground floor. You have to be in on the ground floor.
You don't want to be like our mate Pete that went to go see Iron Man but didn't know there was a post-credit sequence until 3 years later.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be that guy. Go and see Bloodshot. So it was a San Diego Comic-Con last week, and well, over the weekend actually, and they showed off the opening 2 minutes of Josh Boone's New Mutants, Luke.
There's an old Native American proverb that says, "Inside every person, there are two bears, forever locked in combat for your soul. One bear is all things good, compassion, love, trust. The other is all things evil, fear, shame, and self-destruction."
It exists. It's happening. This is
real.
The long lost X-Men film that just disappeared off the face of the earth multiple times, and now it's come back into the kind of seemingly into the forefront. It's meant to be releasing pretty damn soon. So, like, what did you make of this little snippet of? It was kind of like a taster moment, which saw Blue Hunt as Moonstar. I believe anyway, having sort of a bit of a moment in the woods where her father's had some issues, and you had then you got another trailer on the end of that that's kind of still played into that. This seems to be sort of like more of a horrific horror themed version of X-Men. This is taking sort of the weird powers and kind of the more quirky nature of mutants in like rather than the sort of silly side of things. This is taking it into that sort of gritty, horrible. It's almost a curse to be a mutant in a kind of way.
Yeah. I think that's what the most interesting thing about New Mutants, kind of since it was first announced, many, many years ago, when we got the trailers for it a couple of years ago, and then they took it off because they went to go and do reshoots, and then it kind of got lost during all the Disney merger stuff with 20th Century Fox, and now we're getting it again. But it's still kind of like retained that real central core to it, which is that horror vibe to it. Like, there's so many like vibes of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. And I love Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. It's next to the first one. It's my favorite of the Elm Street franchise, and I get so much from that. Like, the posters they've released for it really do feel like Dream Warriors. So I'm really excited by this. I didn't think I was going to be either, but I think it's that anticipation that we've had for the last couple of years of this film being sort of lost to editing or lost to mergers and lost to lawyers and stuff. I'm actually now kind of like, yeah, I'm really interested to see this. It's got a great cast. Like, Anna Taylor-Joy's great. Macy Williams is great. I really like Charlie Heaton in Stranger Things. I'm really, really down for this film.
Yeah, and I think it's never been more important in that sense of like this is the first X-Men film proper being released under the Disney merger. And I think X-Men in Marvel have never been more important, because X-Men have just gone through this, in the comics, this massive sea change in their position within the world. There were 2 stories called Powers of X and House of X that Jonathan Hickman wrote, that consolidated kind of the X-Men lore, wiped away a lot of what had happened before, brought a lot of people back to life, essentially made mutant kind immortal in a sense, and made them their own nation within the comic book universe. So like, they are like, mutant kind are more important than ever. And one of the major story arcs coming out of House of X and Powers of X revolves around the New Mutants characters. And, Magic is in there, Anna Taylor-Joy's character, Sunspot, Henry Zaga's character is in there. Cecilia Reyes is in there. Like, there's a bunch of characters from this film that are front and center of the current New Mutants run in Marvel. And interestingly, in the comic books, the New Mutants' first adventures that have happened in this new run have been revolving around space and space travel. So they've kind of moved into the cosmic realm. And there's all that talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe splitting off into the Earthbound bit and the cosmic bit. And when everyone's sitting there thinking, like, trying to get their head around, like, how will they eventually incorporate X-Men into the MCU? Maybe the New Mutants is a really good way in, because it's not as high pressure as being like, and who is Charles Xavier? And you have to try and slot Charles Xavier in as if he never, as if we never mentioned the fact that we've already had blooming Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver be in the films, and they weren't mutants. They were something else. They were powered up by cosmic
enhanced.
Yeah, exactly. They had all these powers from Infinity Stones instead of from mutantdom. So, like, it's a bit more clumsy to try and shoehorn mutants in if you start with Xavier. But if you start with, like, this cast of misfit characters who've all been in psychiatric hospitals seemingly together, and it's kind of then maybe you take it cosmic as well, and it's a bit weirder in that sense. Like, that kind of fits a bit better. Like, what worked really well for Guardians of the Galaxy was removing them from the main story of the MCU and having them operating in this kind of brand new universe that we got to experience with them for the first time. And then we brought them in to a collision course with everyone else after 2 movies. Kind of having people exist on the fringes of that cinematic universe is quite interesting. And I think that this could be a really, really good way to introduce mutants and mutant kind into the MCU proper. I'm hesitantly excited about this. Obviously, it's gone through so many problems to get to cinemas that you have to kind of take it with a pinch of salt to be like, is it going to live up to the expectations and the kind of the weight of that, that first trailer, I think, that came out, and everyone was so hyped for the look and feel of this film. And then, it just dropped off the face of the earth for a long, long time. But, like, you think with the cast that it's got, and, there must be that kernel of a brilliant idea in there, right?
Oh, absolutely,
there's something really good about this that I think is so worth seeing.
And you mentioned, like, the Marvel side of things as well. Like, we've seen over the years that Marvel often dictate, what is going to be the most important things going forward, or what is not important anymore. Like, when Marvel didn't, when 20th Century Fox had the X-Men license and stuff, you did see this swing of Marvel pretending that X-Men weren't that important. They told Capcom, don't put the X-Men characters into the new Marvel versus Capcom game, because we're not pushing those characters at the moment, because we want to sort of focus on MCU style stuff. So if Marvel Comics are putting so much emphasis on New Mutants, that might tell you something, that they have got sort of like machinations for the MCU and the sort of wider Marvel world that they're created, that this is actually going to be quite an important movie for the next stages of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, potentially anyway. Like, and that's kind of what's exciting about this. It's as you said, it's the first X-Men movie in a new Disney world of Marvel characters.
And one of the things I really like about this the New Mutants specifically in this scenario, and in relation to it not being like a big budget X-Men film, is like, with the main cast of the X-Men, the powers are just off the chain. Like, you've got Dark Phoenix being able to unmake the universe, and, all of this kind of stuff. Magneto can control all metal and all that kind of stuff. And here you're seeing these smaller characters with much more constrained powers, but powers that are much more they take much more of a toll on the individual to have. Like, and you've got Maisie Williams' character Wolfsbane, who is conflicted about being able to turn into a wolf, and all of her religious beliefs kind of coming into clash because she thinks she's a monster. And like that, there's a much more interesting wrinkle of like psychological drama to tap into there that I think we've not really seen much of in the X-Men films. Like, we've obviously seen Wolverine, and we've seen Logan specifically, and Hugh Jackman doing his sort of roaring in angst and about everything. And we over the course of many films, we peeled back layers and layers and layers of Wolverine and got into like who Logan really was as a character. And that was nice to see that reveal, but I think everyone else was so comic booky and bold and big and brash that we never really got too deep on them. And I think this film, from the outset, seems to be trying to dive into who these characters are, and in that sense, feels like much more like Legion, the TV series, to me, which was
totally
a very smart take on powered individuals and mutantdom and all of that kind of stuff. So like, I'm quite excited to see how this turns out, because this could really change the makeup of how Marvel views the X-Men and mutants in the cinematic universe. And from these little bits of trailer and stuff, it still looks pretty damn good. Like, I'm still keen to see this. I think the cast is great, and I can't wait to see more. So if any of our chat today has wet your whistle to see a film at the cinema, you can book your tickets on the link down below at Cineworld Cinemas for most of the films that we've discussed in this episode. Also, if you like the video, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, because every Friday we're going to be doing the show and discussing all of the films that are coming out in Cineworld, and also all of the news from Hollywood as well. Another thing we'd like you to do as well is, if you've gone to Cineworld and you've seen a film in the cinema, please do send us a little video review of telling us what you've seen, what you thought of it. Just film it on your phone, send it in, and we'll include it over the end credits of this show every single week. But until then, we'll see you later. Goodbye.